What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. Today we are talking some college football DFS. Had a week 5, the Friday slate. Awesome pair of games, actually. Virginia Tech, Miami, Washington, Rutgers in the new look Big Ten. We'll get into it all, but before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Bet365. If you live in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, or Pennsylvania, you'll click the link below, make your first deposit at Bet365. Then make a $5 wager on any game, could be a total, could be a side. Whether it wins or loses, you will be paid out $200 in the form of bonus bets. You must be 21 or older, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, 2-game slate, a really fun one too. But there will be some unique ways to play this. Here is our data usage tool. It's available at Stochastic along with projections, ownership, sims, everything you could possibly need in this package. Leading the industry right now, so that's been nice. First things first, 2-game slate. There's going to be one chalky way to play this slate. I think it's going to be, in my opinion, double expensive quarterback, double expensive RB, punt at wide receiver. So first things first, if you play a Restrepo, an expensive receiver, I think it will naturally make you more contrarian. Is it a good idea? Let's get into it. Virginia Tech, Miami. Miami is a 19.5-point favorite, 54.5 total. This is the best game to target on the slate, and it's mainly on the Miami side. We'll start with Virginia Tech. They've been the faster team, 54th in pace with a 42.5% pass rate. That makes sense considering Kyron Jones is a signal caller. He's had a bad year. His completion percentage is below 50%, only averaging 191 pass yards per game, but he does give you 204 rushing yards on the ground. That is basically 50 yards per game. That's a solid floor. And I think it's enough for me considering the quarterback situations we have in the second game. More on that later. It's a 2-game slate, so one thing I will say off the top is you are more live if you want to run 4 running backs or an extra receiver in your super flex. I still don't recommend it, and I think drones gives you some safety. Also, there's enough cheap receivers where you can pretty easily get to him. In the backfield, Bashul Tootin came into last week as a game-time decision. He still handled 15 carries, and even though he didn't see a target, his route rate was right around his normal 60-ish percent. He's at 57% on the year. So while they didn't throw him the ball, I'm not really that worried. This guy had 10 targets combined in the first 2 games. As long as he's still healthy and didn't have a setback or anything, he should be fine. It's a very tough matchup, but it's a 2-game slate as well. You kind of got to play somebody. I think Tootin is okay. He would be lower on my ranking of just running backs in general on this slate because of the brutal matchup as a massive underdog. He's also expensive. That needs to be considered too. At wide receiver, we've seen some consolidation, largely due to injuries. Allie Jennings hasn't played in a while. Missed their last game, has been banged up all year. He only has 10 targets on the year. That sort of has allowed them to just play Jalen Lane, Daquan Felton, and Steven Gosnell. I don't think that is preferred. Allie Jennings is expected to be back here, so I imagine this dips back towards the rotation. You didn't see a lot of players at like 90% of the routes before that injury. With that, we did see it consolidate last week. So returning, I think we have this kind of break back out into maybe Jalen Lane's at like 80% of the routes. Daquan Felton should be around 70. And then I think you see Gosnell come in around 60 rather than the 87 he played last game. Allie Jennings did play 72% of the routes in the first 2 games before getting hurt and then stuck at 41%, and then he missed last week. Tight end, Benji Gosnell has played 90% of the routes or more in 2 of their 4 games, one of them being their most recent contest. I kind of think this might be sticky with them. They just don't have a lot of tight end options. Nick Gallo has not been able to get on the field. So I'm interested in Gosnell. We don't have him projected at 90% of the routes because he hasn't done it consistently. But man, that's a really good route rate in their last game. Had 6 targets in the contest too. He's 3,300. So again, my preferred way to play this is to go down and play the really cheap guys. Gosnell certainly in play. Jennings is in play at 36. I just don't have a ton of room for Jalen Lane or even Daquan Felton at 4K. I think you could do better than him, even though he's been targeted pretty heavily. The return of Jennings probably drops that for some of these guys. Miami, Cam Ward's in your lineup. Just play him. Don't make a mistake. He's averaging 360 passing yards per game. Efficiency probably drops within ACC play, but I mean, they've now diced up a lot of really quality teams. We just saw him beat Florida, of course, and then USF, a lot of people were on. Cam Ward met no resistance in that game. He's running a little bit, 89 yards on the ground. It's not a staple of his game, but he can do it. He's averaging over 4 yards per carry. So Cam Ward just locked in, best quarterback play on the board, not even close. Miami has beaten the snot out of these teams so badly that Damian Martinez has actually seen a reduced role. He's only averaging 11.3 touches per game. Now, you go back to the Florida game, he did touch the ball 17 times in that contest, and that ended up being a routing in favor of Miami. I still think when these games play closer than the spread, or maybe Miami just has a tougher game later in the year, Damian Martinez is going to be the player they focus on. With that said, I'm not sure if this is the matchup as a 19.5-point favorite. I'm still willing to throw darts because he's cheap. 5,700 is a very affordable tag on him. He has an awesome route rate. It's up around 40% in their more competitive games. And then I'm just not sure how much they're actually trying to get like A.J. Allen, Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle work in highly competitive games. I think it'll be a carry here and there, but rather than around 20% of the touches in the backfield, it's probably closer to 10 with Martinez jumping up to like 40 or 50%. So I'll definitely throw some darts on Martinez. He's just way too good. And honestly, after the 3-touchdown game, I thought his price would jump more. It did not. He's still very, very inexpensive. Receiving game, I'm playing some of these Miami receivers. Restrepo should be contrarian. Just the running backs are going to be more on in this slate. So 7,500 Restrepo leads you down a different path. There aren't a lot of cheap running backs, so getting to him just makes you different. And he's an awesome player, averaging 90 yards per game. He's going to be at like 95% of the routes if this game stays competitive. No problem with him. Just think in cash game stuff, like low risk stuff, I'm still probably not getting there because Sam Brown, Isaiah Horton are below 5K. And man, this just flat out doesn't make sense. One thing Miami's done that's changed this year is Jacoby George has not been a full-time player. And I thought Isaiah Horton would kind of be the very clear wide receiver 4. It's a little muddier than that. And then you had Sam Brown come in from Houston, who has a unique skill set. He's an absolute burner, which this offense kind of lacked. His route rate has been awesome. He hasn't been below 54% of the routes in any game. He's been above 65 in 3 of the 4. And in the last game, he was at 84% of the routes. The only player that trailed was Xavier Restrepo. Sam Brown is flat out too cheap. He should be a priority in this offense. Even if he comes in at like the 50% of the routes, 54% was his low. If he's at 54%, I don't know if he's appropriately priced there. And if he goes back up to like the 84 we saw in week 4, he's a stone cold smash play. Horton also saw his routes increase. Now, he hasn't played more than 56% in any game, but in week 2, he was at 39. Week 3, he was at 45, and then he jumped back up to 53. He had 9 targets in the game, played really well. I think he's usable. That came at the expense of Jacoby George, who surprisingly only has 1 game above 50% of the routes. So, he's just too expensive for his role. If you wanted to get there and pay up to be contrarian, sure. But I'll save the 300 to Horton, the 600 to Sam Brown. It's pretty easy in my opinion. Last up, Elijah Arroyo is pretty interesting at tight end. I do think it is important in certain lineups to go down to this range. It's not comfortable, but there are usable guys. We talked about Gosnell and Virginia Tech. Arroyo's route rating competitive games is around 55 to 65%. He played 69% of the routes in week 1, 55 in week 3, 58 in week 4. At 3,300, that's enough. I think he's usable there. Outside of that, no interest in anyone else. It's just a rotation, and Nykar, Trader, Ray Joseph, they're going to need a routing in order to play more than we expect. Washington and Rutgers, the game that is somewhat interesting, but less so than Miami, Virginia Tech. It has a 44 total, 2.5 point spread in favor of Rutgers. These teams are very slow. Washington 104th in pace, Rutgers 120th. Both teams I mean, they leave a little bit to be desired. Washington does have a 50.5% pass rate. Rutgers is at 34.5%. They're running the ball incessantly. And the reason it's trickier to play this game is Will Rogers is ceding work to Damon Williams, the really high recruit for this team. I believe he originally committed to Arizona, and then he followed Jed Fish over. But he's played in every single game. He's thrown passes in every single game, and he's handled rush attempts in every single game. He's a much better runner than Will Rogers, so sometimes he comes in on these gadgety plays, but he does have a pass attempt in every game. And they lost a game to Washington State. This is not going away. The reason we liked Will Rogers was Mike Leach. I mean, he would throw the ball 56 times a game. Now he's throwing it 28, and he's still taking sacks. So, I mean, I would just rather get to drones, or honestly, I'll take Ethan Kaliak-Manis on the other side. More on him later. I would rank Will Rogers last among quarterbacks price adjusted. Jonah Coleman, I think, is fine. My two favorite running backs are actually in this game. Coleman has handled a solid workload, and a lot of it has come as a pass catcher. He's averaging 17.5 touches per game, which is excellent, and his route rate is up above 40%. We saw him hurdle a guy last week, which was pretty cool. It's not going to be easy sledding against Rutgers, especially now that they returned two in their front seven who were starters last year but missed their first couple games. They returned last week. Still, Rutgers has shown some cracks on the ground, so I think there will be opportunities. If that doesn't work, his pass catching is just fine with me. He's one of my top two running backs. I like playing lineups that have Monangai, Coleman, and Damian Martinez at the expense of Bashul Tutin. In the receiving game, again, I think we're prioritizing cheap guys to get those stud running backs. Jeremiah Hunter's 4K, so he immediately stands out. His route rate is not that different compared to Giles Jackson and Denzel Boston. He just hasn't really been targeted a lot. He's at 12.5% target share. You look at Giles, he's at 24%. Denzel Boston's at nearly 26%. Hunter's a talented player. We've seen him with Cal before, earn targets. So I'm not sure here. This might be a small sample trap. He might just be worse than these guys. But I do think playing him is completely fine, just because I think prioritizing Cam Ward, the expensive QBs and running backs, makes a lot of sense on this slate. With that said, it's not like I'm going to come in with zero Denzel Boston or Giles Jackson. Kaleki Latu at tight end is interesting as well. He has a pretty good route rate. There have been a lot of injuries to Washington tight ends, which have narrowed this distribution quite a bit. Otten hasn't played this year. Quentin Moore has been injured. He's only appeared in week 1. DeGraff is kind of their second tight end right now, and he's at about like 20% of the routes on the year. So Latu, while he hasn't earned a lot of targets, he's averaged 4.3 over the last 3 games. It's pretty good. Better than Hunter. So perhaps throw a dart all the way at the bottom. And, if you play this where you go all the way down to Latu, to Arroyo, maybe you can afford one of the expensive receivers. I haven't built a ton of lineups, but my first looks did go cheap at receiver. But I didn't try playing all the way down, so maybe you can make it work. On the Rutgers side, Kaliak-Manis has been shocking, man. There's no way to say this other than he's been highly efficient. The problem is he's only averaging 24 attempts per game, so you're not really live for much. He's not taking a lot of sacks, and he's running more than I would have expected him to. With that said, I still don't have a ton of interest in Kaliak-Manis. I think I'm playing drones and Cam Ward most of the time. Where I can't get there, I'll probably just go all the way down to Kaliak-Manis over Will Rogers. But it's a tougher matchup for him. They haven't been in a lot of difficult matchups this year. It's basically just been VT. He diced them up for 10.8 yards per attempt. So I think there's a good floor. I'm not really sure on the ceiling with Kaliak-Manis. Monangai is the real beneficiary of this run rate. He has, oh my goodness, 20 touches, 28 touches, and 27 touches in their 3 games this year. What an unbelievable role for Kyle Monangai. He's averaging 152 rushing yards per game. They don't throw the ball a lot, but his route rate was at 60% last week. It's at 55% on the year. Just an absolute wagon in terms of role in the offense. And importantly, this was with Sam Brown back last week. Sam Brown had 14 carries himself. Monangai still had 26. It's going to be a timeshare to some degree, but man, I don't see any way. We're getting away from a Rutgers back. This is a very safe role. And last thing, Kaliak-Manis had 9 attempts in their last game. Those were designed. I think there's a better rushing floor with Kaliak-Manis than people are giving credit for. I will play more Kaliak-Manis than Will Rogers, talking myself into him more and more. The receiver game for this team, while they don't throw the ball a lot, what we can say is they're condensed. It's Demir Miller up top with a 30% target share. He's 4K flat. That's always going to play. Ian Strong and Chris Long are the other two main receivers. Long will share more routes with like a KJ Duff than perhaps we'd like. But honestly, none of these guys are really expensive to the point where I'm fading them. And even tight end Kenny Fletcher's looked awesome. I wish he didn't just come off an 8-target game where he played really well, because his routes actually still trail Ian Strong and Chris Long. But Fletcher is certainly playable there too. I think just for pivots, I might rather get to Strong at 100 cheaper, see if I can't make that work into something else, or go down to Long if I need the 200. But yeah, Kenny Fletcher's been a real surprise for this team. He has more yards than Chris Long, which is also a bit of a surprise, but he's usable there as well. Hope that's a decent preview of the slate. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or reach out on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Main slate coming up later in the week. Until then, good luck. We'll see you guys next time.